Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We are once again breaking down another Florida State commitment in the 2026 cycle. And this one, a kid I like a lot, and a kid that is a straight up box checker in terms of guys you're looking for at the high school ranks. Four-star defensive back Jay Timmons committing to Florida State. Here's where I'll start with Jay Timmons. You turn on the film and you kind of just assume that he's from a football family. Now, I obviously knew who his pops was before I turned on the film, but you didn't need to tell me that. He came from a football family. When you turn on the film, this kid plays the sport the right way. Number two-way production. The Florida State fans who've been rocking with the boys for a while know, especially when we're talking about defensive backs, I think two-way production at the high school ranks massive. You can tell he's a damn good wide receiver because his ball skills very, very good. When that football is in the air, when he's playing cornerback, very comfortable going up and addressing the football and making a play on the football, where a lot of defensive backs who don't have that pass catcher background look very uncomfortable, and they look very uncomfortable as they're youngsters at the collegiate ranks. Number three, I think a very intriguing athletic profile. Now, he's not necessarily the biggest and longest defensive back, but he's a guy that good track and field times, very fluid athlete, and really physical. And here's the last thing I'll say about Jay Timmons before we take a little bit more of a deeper dive. The versatility. That is very clearly something that Tony White is prioritizing with these kids at the high school ranks, not only in the secondary, but on the defensive line as well. We want guys that can move around and play a lot of different positions because that's what the Tony White defense is. We're going to be kind of a positionless defense where we're putting guys in a lot of different spots. If you want to play for this Tony White defense, you have to have versatility. You have to have the ability to play in a lot of different spots from a week-to-week basis, from a snap-to-snap basis. I think Jay Timmons certainly has that. I think Jay Timmons is capable of playing just about any position in the back end for Florida State. Now, I think he's probably going to be at his best as a nickel corner or potentially a safety. I didn't see a problem in terms of what he was as a boundary cornerback either, and I think he has the chance to hold up as a boundary cornerback as well. A lot more to get in with Jay Timmons, fired up to do so. This is 4 blue chip commitments in the last 4 days. And I'll just say this, it feels and looks a little bit different. And we talked about it yesterday. I'll say it again. This new coaching staff coming in, kind of breathing a little bit of fire into this program on the recruiting trail. That's what we needed. We say it all the time. If Mike Norvell is going to figure it out at Florida State, we are going to need to see this team recruit at a higher level. And you're starting to see them do that, which I think should fire up a lot of Florida State fans. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And it's been really fun, especially over the last couple of days, breaking down these commitments. The amount of support that y'all have shown the boys has been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And all right, son of Lawrence Timmons. So the bloodlines are good, and I think that matters. I think it matters probably more than most do. I love when these kids have grown up around the sport and knows what it looks like to play the sport the right way and to play the sport at a high level. They just come into their college programs a little bit more prepared to be a collegiate athlete and a high level one at that. Number two-way production on the defensive side of the football, 10 pass breakups, 4 interceptions during his junior year, playing wide receiver, 40 catches for 755 yards, 8 touchdowns. This is a guy that gets it done on both sides of the football. And I think what intrigues me the most about it is he's not necessarily the biggest, longest cornerback, but when that football is in the air and he needs to go up and make a play, he's very clearly comfortable doing that. You see a lot of young cornerbacks and a lot of young defensive backs panic when the football is in the air. They just don't have a ton of experience addressing and playing the football. Jay Timmons, there's no panic in this kid's game. He's getting his head around to the football and he's going up and making a play on it. Last thing I'll say, 10-9 in the 100-meter dash, short area quicks, but most importantly, he's a physical dude. He's going to put his hands on opposing wide receivers at the line of scrimmage. He's going to fire downhill and get involved supporting the run game. And that's kind of what makes me think his best position is probably going to be nickel or safety. For me, it's probably a little bit more of a nickel corner because I love his ability to play man coverage with the short area quicks and the speed. But I also love his ability to be a run supporting guy. And when you're playing nickel, you have to be a unique cat. You have to have the athleticism to hold up in coverage, but you also have to be really good triggering downhill and supporting the run. You're essentially that third linebacker on the field. You got to be able to support the run. And Jay Timmons, 5'11", but he's a $185, and he's all of a $185. Probably would play closer to 200 pounds once he gets to Florida State. I think he's more than capable being a supporting cast in the run game from that nickel spot. I also like the instincts. And so the safety position, when he has that ability to have his eyes on the quarterback, I think that could be a very intriguing spot for him as well. That's what you love. If he plays the safety position, he has the ability to come up and play man coverage. This is a guy that allows you to do a lot of different things. When you want to play him as a single high safety, he's 10-9 in the 100-meter dash. He has some range to cover a lot of distance in the back end, the physicality to come up into the box and support the run. That's probably the thing you love most about Jay Timmons is the versatility that he's going to bring to the Tony White defense. Now, where does Florida State go from here? I think the eyes, especially in the secondary, are on Chauncey Keenan. And I think Chauncey Keenan becomes a little bit more of an intriguing prospect for Florida State. One, because he's a 5-star. More importantly, you have Jay Timmons. I think you probably know that Jay Timmons is going to be at his best playing that nickel or safety spot. You land a guy like Chauncey Keenan, who I think is the prototype for a boundary cornerback that has monster upside. You land Chauncey Keenan, you get a little bit more flexibility with a guy like Jay Timmons. You don't have to force him to play a boundary cornerback spot, of which I think he can play, but he's probably going to be better as a safety or nickel. Go land Chauncey Keenan, you're probably getting the best out of Jay Timmons as well. Kind of like how that secondary is getting built in the 2026 cycle. And you look at Florida State in the 2026 cycle as a whole and say, we're doing a lot of good things, and we're starting to hit on some of these blue chip guys that we need to hit on. Now, what I'll say here is if there's one knock, want to see a little bit more blue chip along the line of scrimmage. And I'm a fan of James Carrington, and I'm a fan of Tico coming from Georgia. For me, it's probably more on the offensive line. Like, you got to scroll pretty far down to start seeing these guys on the offensive line. And look, that's not a shot at a guy like Jacoby Green, who I think is going to be a very, very quality interior offensive lineman for Florida State. It's more the tackle spot. It's hard. Florida State got lucky and were able to find a couple of starting caliber tackles in the portal. That's probably not something you want to have to rely on year after year. Want to see Florida State go out and land a couple of blue chip bodies at the tackle position. If you can do that, you start to feel really good about the talent that Florida State's landing in the 2026 cycle. And I again, will kind of say the same thing we've always been saying, and that is give it some time. This is not an easy program to recruit to coming off the 2-10 season with all the hot seat talk about Mike Norvell. And I'm not saying that hot seat talk is not warranted, because it certainly is. This new coaching staff was put in a difficult spot, and I think they're doing a really, really good job. If you can show that, hey, we're back trending in the right direction in the 2025 season, start winning some more football games than many people think they will, I think the recruiting is going to get a lot better too. Because I think the one, we say this all the time, Florida State to me checks a lot of boxes. They should be a program that consistently recruits top 10 classes in the country. This 2026 cycle is kind of unique because it's coming off a year where it got ugly for Florida State. What happens if they put together a good season? How can they close 2026? How can they build in 2027, especially with the staff that, to me, it's showing me that they can get it done as recruiters. That's probably the biggest takeaway I have for Florida State during this offseason is we probably knew the 2026 cycle wasn't going to be elite. It's just going to be really hard to land a top 5 class coming off a 2-10 season. But I think this coaching staff is showing their recruiting chops. And then I think what excites Florida State fans, or at least what should excite Florida State fans, is, hey, what happens if this Florida State team starts winning football games and they got a staff that has shown they can do a better job recruiting than the previous staff? I think that's what excites me the most. We'll pause it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. A lot more to come. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.